talk and not die. It's so difficult. All right, good evening. Hello, 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 hello. All right, it's good to be with you all. I will show you a quick picture on my phone. If you're watching online, sorry, I meant to put this in my slideshow, but I forgot. I was watching Jeopardy last night, and the final Jeopardy question was, the category was New Testament Greek. And Jennifer looks at me and goes, you better get it. And I go, no pressure. Spoiler alert, I didn't get it. But she did. So here's the clue, right? This is from this. I took a picture of the screen last night. It says, did anyone watch it last night or just me? Okay, so a famous passage in Matthew 6 refers to kleptai, meaning them. So, I know, right? Da, 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 da. You got 30 seconds to try and get this right. I'll read it again. A famous passage in Matthew 6 refers to kleptai, meaning them. You're on the clock. And so, I was like, okay, Matthew 6. What is Matthew 6? Matthew 6. Yeah, you do. Broadly. New Testament, okay. Matthew would be a gospel. Matthew 6 would be... Matthew 5, 6, and 7 are... Yes. You got it? It's all right. But I know, I saw the aha moment. No. Matthew 5, 6, and 7. You're gonna go, oh, as soon as I say it. You're gonna go, what? The Beatitudes are Matthew 5. So Matthew 5, 6, and 7 are the Sermon on the Mount, right? Yes, okay. Okay, so I knew this. I was like, oh, I know this. Matthew 5, 6, 7 are Sermon on the Mount. Good. Okay, kleptai. So it's not the Beatitudes, because this clue says Matthew 6. And the Beatitudes are in Matthew chapter 5, right? So that's the blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the peacemakers. So I know the clue's not that, because that's Matthew 5. But what's Matthew 6? And kleptai. And Jennifer goes, kleptai, like kleptomaniac? Is that where they get the word for like thieves? And I was like, they talk about thieves in Matthew 6? It says, do not store up for yourself treasures in heaven where moth and rust destroy, right? And thieves break in and steal. Right? So she was correct, and it was thieves. And that's what it is in Matthew chapter 6. Only one of the contestants got it right. The other two missed it. And he didn't wager very much, but he got it right. So. Oh, I know, for forever, right? Now, those of you who have walked with a loved one through an advanced degree, you know that you learn quite a lot yourself as you go. I know a lot about genetics. I'm not quite a genetic counselor, but I know more than your average bear. And Jennifer used to, I remember driving to go to a wedding, and she would show me Hebrew flashcards, right? And she's like, how come you don't know this? I know this. And I was like, yeah, you know it because you've shown me 10 times, and I'm trying not to miss our exit. Anyways, totally unrelated. That was for free. Excuse me. Okay, when you came in tonight, there is a handout. Excuse me. And it's on the Philistines, which they are very interesting people. We'll talk about that in a moment. On the back of all that, you'll find a map, which I hope is helpful. So you'll find a map. It's always good to know where things are if you get lost. And then we'll go from there. So I have a number of things to cover and get into, and we will talk about where we're going. I'll get my notes settled here. Excuse me. And we'll go. Sound good? Is it all right if I open with a word of prayer for us this evening? Holy God, we pray that you would be in the midst of our discussion and our study as we encounter this strange book in the Old Testament. Let us take some of its principles to heart. Let us hear its lessons anew, perhaps hear its warnings anew, all to the end that we would be shaped and formed to be closer disciples of you and resemble your kingdom more closely. We pray this all in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, there is a lot to cover in the book of Judges. We will recall with great clarity. Let's find it. Right, it's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. I always remember those three together, like Joshua, Judges, Ruth, as if Josh is being judgmental towards Ruth. That's how I can remember it. And then it's Joshua, Judges, Ruth. And then it's, 1st and 2nd Samuel. We will remember that Samuel's kind of a judge. He's a prophet. And so it's 1st and 2nd Samuel. And then he's the one who, anoints the kings, like Saul and David. And so for there to be Samuel, he's the one that does the anointing for the kings. And so then there's the kings. So it's 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, and then you have to have Chronicles. Chronicles are like stories, and those are the stories of the kings. And it's really like Kings Part 2, Kings again. So there's a lot of overlap in some of these books between Kings and Chronicles. We're not there, but you get the idea. So we're laying the land. So it's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles. And then it's like Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, and you're into the wisdom literature. So you've moved through the Pentateuch, the first 5, to the 11 books of the historical books, and then you're into the wisdom literature. And that's sort of how the Old Testament is organized. So you can find Judges pretty quickly. And there are a number of chapters. For some reason, 21? Is that right? Whew, okay, it's like I prepared. All right. And it would be nice if in the book of Judges it was organized, like the most important to the least important, or the least important to the most important, or like, the ones we have very little information on, the ones we have the most information on. But of course, that's not how it's organized. It's organized in its own way, for its own reasons, and its own purposes. I'm going to check my volume real fast online. Just give me 10 seconds. It looks fine. Okie dokie. Thanks for your patience. So we are talking about tonight is when deliverance is dramatic. Judges chapters 3 through 8 and 13 through 16. We're going to bounce around a little bit. If you want to read some of these other ones between our times, I encourage you to. Next week we'll talk about when leadership is costly, and then when the cycle begins, and when faithfulness is quiet. The judges that we encounter tonight, this is the problem when I take my notes in multiple places, is Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, and Samson. So if you mess up the words, that's fine. No one knows how to pronounce them anyways. Just be decisive and confident. But Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, and Gideon are all Judges 3 through 8. Excuse me, and Samson is Judges 13 through 16. Doing okay so far? Yes? Bueno. All right. What I want to do is I want to read some of it. I don't want to read all of it because it would take too long. And then what we'll do is we'll hop into the different themes and things. So what I did to prepare this was I read through it, and then I took my own notes. And so here were my notes, and I'm going to just tell you what I wrote down so you can kind of see what caught my eye, and then you'll see kind of some things that we'll talk about. I wrote down the tribes in Israel and the nations, and there's a bunch of people that they encounter, and it's pretty early on in Judges. And it's like those things you come across in the Bible where there's just a list of names, and you're like, who are these people? You know what I mean? Like they sound half made up. You might as well put in like Narnia and Middle Earth and, Darth Vader and whatever. You name it. It's like the Klingons. It's like you read it and it's like, who are the Hebusites and the Jebusites and the Amorites and the Hivites and, Amalekites. All those kites and ites and, those people. So I ran across that. I ran across the word Baal and Asherah more than once in our stories. So who's Baal or Baal, and what is the Asherah? I want to talk a little bit about military technology and nerd out just for a moment, in particular because in our stories there are chariots of iron, and that's an important demarcation in biblical studies for lots of reasons. But that's in Judges 4:3. We'll look again at the cycle, kind of how they cry out, and then a judge is brought up, and then they deliver the people, and then there's rest. Each story has a section on that. I wanted to talk about the angel of the Lord, but I don't think we have time for that, so we'll have to come back to it. And then we'll talk about why things are named that way. We'll look at my favorite verse in all of Judges. Should we start there? I think we should start there. Judges chapter 16, verse 16. Yep, that's my favorite verse in the entire book of Judges. It says, "Finally, after she had nagged him with her words day after day and pestered him, he was tired to death." This is the word of the Lord. No. I think it would make a great T-shirt. You know what I mean? My wife would not appreciate it. But, sometimes there's humor in the Bible, and it's good to catch it sometimes. And then there's also a Philistine god named Dagon, who we won't get to tonight, but we'll come back to it. So, we'll hop in, shall we? Here is Israel in the time of the judges. This map on the left is that black and white one that you have. And if you are tracking along at home, there are a number of things or places that are mentioned. What happens is in Judges chapter 3, it says, "These are the nations that the Lord left to test all those in Israel who had no experience of any war in Canaan. It was only that successive generations of Israelites might know war, to teach those who had no experience of it before." Verse 3, "The 5 lords of the Philistines and all the Canaanites and the Sidonians and the Hivites who lived on Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon as far as Labo Hamath. They were for the testing of Israel, to know whether Israel would obey the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their ancestors by Moses." So, pop quiz. According to the author of Judges, why are there still heathens in the Promised Land? Not a trick question. They weren't supposed to be there, but they're still there. And why does the author of Judges assume that they didn't drive them out, and they're there to test, right, whether or not the Israelites will remain faithful to God? So that's how the author, he, she, them, they are telling us. That's their understanding of why these people are here. Okay? Does that make sense so far?
No, because I thought God wanted them to go. I mean, I didn't understand it. Did he want them to drive them out, or did he want them to stay to test the Israelites first?
Which is it?
Yeah.
Yes. I know. I think you're right. So what we're going to encounter is, let me see if I can do this. Excuse me. This is an old book, nod your head. This is ancient stuff. And so there are people living here, and there are people who believe to follow Yahweh, right? They understand God to be a deliverer. He delivered them from Egypt. That's why they're here. But then maybe there's generations of people that don't understand why their neighbors don't follow Yahweh, or why are there still these people, and isn't this land ours? Didn't God give it to us? And Grandma and Grandpa are saying, well, yeah, God did give it to us. And then, little Sally around the campfire is saying, then why are the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites still here? And Grandma looks at him and says, well, because Grandpa didn't kick him out like he was supposed to, And then little Sally says, well, why not? Did Grandpa not trust Yahweh? And then the author says, right, well, they're there. Verse 4, "They were for the testing of Israel, to know whether Israel would obey the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their ancestors by Moses." And so I think it's both and. I think the author is trying to understand why things are the way they are, or why the situation is currently the way it is. Does that make sense?
I guess that's one of those things you just have to accept because that's the way it is. Makes sense? No.
He should have just done it. Yeah. So I think what we're going to get into is something called an etiology, and I'll explain this a little bit later, is especially with like place names. Why is it called this or why is it called that? And something happens and they name it this because of something that happens there. So hopefully some of this conversation will make place on the book end when we talk about place names. Because I think the author of Judges is trying to understand why there's people in the promised land. And they understand it to be as a test from God. Okay? All right. So let's look just as best we can over here. And it's a little blurry, that's why I handed this out. You have like Aram. I'm going to disappear if you're online. You have Aram here. You have the Phoenicia up here. You have the Canaanites here. But as we talked about, the Canaanites, it's kind of a catch-all phrase for anyone in the land of Canaan, which is that whole section of land. Remember with great clarity that this piece of land touches 3 continents. It touches Africa down here. It touches, all of Asia over here, and it touches Europe up here. And so in terms of like global trade, it's very important. Remember, there's no airplanes. If you want to take a bundle of cotton, silk, inks, dyes, grain from Egypt, and you want to trade it up in Athens or Thessalonica or Corinth, what are you going to do? You can ship it, you can put it on a boat. How safe is it?
They had to stay really close to
They had to stay very close to the coast, so it would take some time. And then you can only ship it during certain times of the year. Your other option is to send it over land. Susceptible to some things. Brigands, thieves, natural disasters, camels breaking a leg, stuff like that. So this chunk of land is incredibly important from an economic perspective. And it's incredibly important militarily as well, in terms of it touching all these different areas and moving troops and securing your border. Okay, so we'll get there. There's Aram here, there's Ammon down here, there's Moab, the Moabites, the Edomites, right? You remember some of these words from Old Testament stuff? The Amalekites are over here. Philistia is here, sometimes called up here by the Phoenician coast, this whole area. And then the Israelites are in this section right here. Doing okay? All right. It's a great question. Yeah. We know the timetable is before the monarchy, right? So there's no kings yet. So David has not ruled. The reason why I don't want to give you a precise answer is because I'm not sure ultimately we know. We can date it within certainty of some things. For example, there's going to be a power on the scene that has iron and uses iron. The Philistines know how to work iron. And this is probably why they were so cotton-pick and difficult to deal with. Right? If someone has iron and you have bronze or copper, they have superior weaponry. So, but for this to be listed in Judges 4:3, I think is what it is. It says they have chariots of iron. Well, now we know that iron technology has to be available for the story to take place.
Okay, so the great civilizations like Egypt, is it going on now?
Yes,
So Egypt is probably doing
its own thing.
its own thing.
Yes,
Care about that.
probably not. Probably has its own inner turmoil. So this is, I'm trying to think of the technological term for it, whether it's prehistory or not. Y'all, I really nerded out this afternoon, so I'll jump ahead a little bit, and then we'll come back to it. So, don't worry about all this. So, here's like the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age, okay? I'm not going to bore you with all the history lessons, but this has to do primarily with when people used tools made of this material. And so when does this story take place? Somewhere in this area, towards maybe the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age. Tracking? Have you heard these terms before? Okay. So, but this is really interesting. I think it's really interesting. What age are we currently in? And they have shifted away from naming it after the tools that were used to more like the Persian Empire, the Roman Empire, like the Roman Age, or like the Middle Ages, or the Renaissance era, or the Age of Enlightenment. Are you familiar with some of these terms? So that's what they moved towards, more concepts and ideas, as opposed to constructs of tools, because we still use iron today. So it technically has not ended. Does that make sense? Okay. We'll come back to that. But as far as dating it, it's pretty difficult to date it because of modern problems. Okay. We're going to keep on pushing on. We'll circle back and come back to some of these. Okay? So, here is the maps of the folks who are there and involved, and all these judges are raised up in certain areas of Israel. Some of them come from different tribes. Some of them come from different people groups. And let's read about some of those now, if we can. So I'm going to read in Judges chapter 3. Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much. I'm going to burn through those like candy. Thank you. So in Judges chapter 3, verse 7 is where I want to pick up. No, I lied. I'm going to read the people again, right? Verse 5. So the Israelites lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Y'all with me? Yeah. Doing okay? Okay. And they took their daughters as wives for themselves, and their own daughters they gave to their sons, and they worshipped their gods. So, the Bible's telling us one of the problems is the intermarriage of these people who do not believe the same thing, and that they are going to have a bad time. The Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, forgetting the Lord their God, and worshiping the Baals and the Asherahs. Okay, so what do? They do what's evil in the sight of God. Well, what does that mean? It doesn't really say, let's be clear. It doesn't say they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, e.g., sacrificing to foreign gods, paying too much to the temple. Like it doesn't say. It just says they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, period. And then it does say that they worship Baal and the Asherahs. Therefore, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of King Cushan-Rishathaim of Aram-Naharaim. And the Israelites served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. But, verse 9, when the Israelites cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the Israelites who delivered them, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel. There's that word, judged. He went out to war, and the Lord gave King Cushan-Rishathaim of Aram into his hand, and his hand prevailed over Cushan-Rishathaim. So the land had rest 40 years. Was it really 40? Right? Right? We've been that's a significant number in the Bible. It means a period of time, a period of completion, a period of wholeness. A generation. There was rest for a generation. Was it really 40? Sure. Is it metaphorically 40? Sure. Right? It can be both and. But a generation. Then Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. And then it picks back up again. Verse 12. Hear the words, right? The Israelites, again, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord strengthened King Eglon of Moab. Right? Pause. Where's Moab? Down here. Against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And again, it doesn't tell us what that is. There's no parenthetical that says they did these 6 naughty things, right? They just do things that are evil in the sight of the Lord. An alliance with the Ammonites and the Amalekites. Do you hear that? So, the Amalekites and the Amorites, they line up with the king of Moab down here, and they go to war with Israel. He went and defeated Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms, which sounds lovely. So the Israelites served King Eglon of Moab 18 years. Pause. Do you hear the difference in the language between and there was rest 40 years, but they served for 18. There's such a specificity sometimes. And I think when the Bible is specific, strangely so, it's probably pretty literal, right? But then when the Bible slips into 12, 3, 7, 40, right? I'm like, oh, I understand. It's like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Kind of like when my kids say, they'll say Dad, I need a break or whatever. And I'll say, fine, go play for a little bit. And they go well, what's a little bit? Right? It just means a while. Just go play for a while. How long's that? A season of completeness. Go and do that thing. And then after a while, I will call you back. You don't need to know exactly how long you need to go be complete. Yeah, right? Anyways. Verse 15. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud, son of Gera, the Benjamite, a left-handed man. So if he's a Benjamite, what tribe is he from? Tribe of Benjamin, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. He's also a left-handed man, which is very strange. Now, my daughter's left-handed, so I'm going to be, and I love my children. But left-handed people, especially in the ancient world, were thought to be rather strange. And there's a reason for this. All right? Rick, may I borrow you for a moment? Come on up here. Come here. Good. Are you a righty or a lefty? I'm a righty. Okay, good. Otherwise, this whole thing would be for naught. Stand right here. Okay, now, I'm just going to illustrate this by way of Alexander the Great and something called the phalanx. So, let's say we are serving in the military together, and we are going to go fight the enemy. Okay? Yeah. You would have probably greaves, on your ankles, right? You'd have greaves on your arms, and you'd have, a helmet. We might have, a leather armor on. But what weapons would we have in our hand? We would have probably a long, pointy stick, and we would have a shield. Okay? Now, if you're going to go stab someone with a long, pointy stick, what hand are you going to use?
My right.
Okay, I'm also a righty. I'm going to stab the enemy. Okay, so we're right-handed. Go right-handed. And now what are you holding in your left hand?
The shield.
The shield. So hold your shield up. And now you see why the shield can protect me, and I can protect the person to my left, and I can stab with my right hand. Now, if I'm a lefty, how does it work? Put them on the end. That's the only way, right? I'd have to be down here. Thank you very much, right? Well done. But you can see when you fight in formation and all the weapons are the same, they have to be the same handedness. And so these small details emerge from our story. This guy named Ehud is a weirdo, right? But God's going to use him nonetheless. And the story is a weird one, but we should read it nonetheless because it's just strange and weird, and it's in the Bible, and it's one of those things that'll be on Jeopardy one day. Okay, when the Israelites cried out to the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, right? That's the word judge. It's the same word in Hebrew. Ehud, son of Gera, the Benjamite, a left-handed man. The Israelites sent tribute by him to King Eglon of Moab. Right, the Moabites just wiped the floor with them, right, for 18 years. They need delivered. So Ehud made for himself a sword with two edges, a cubit in length. Why does all this matter? I don't know. The author thinks it does. He fastened it on his right thigh, under his clothes. Small detail. If I'm right-handed, right, and everyone's right-handed, you would expect to find a secret weapon on my left-hand side so I could draw it out. You can't really draw like this. So it's on the wrong side. He's wrong-handed. Okay. Then he presented the tribute to King Eglon of Moab. Now, Eglon was a very fat man. Isn't that a great word? I love it. When Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent the people who carried the tribute on their way, but he himself turned back at the sculptured stones near Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. So the king said, silence! And all his attendants went out from his presence, because he's an idiot. And Ehud came to him while he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber. I think it means cool as in temperature, not cool as in awesome. And he said, I have a message from God for you, which is a pretty dope thing to say before you stab someone. So he rose from his seat, and then Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and he thrust it into Eglon's belly, and the hilt went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not draw the sword out of his belly, and the dirt came out. Gross. I love that my footnote on this says, the meaning of the Hebrew of the dirt came out is uncertain. I would say so. Then Ehud went out into the vestibule and closed the doors of the roof chamber on him and locked them. After he had gone, the servants came. When they saw that the doors of the roof chamber were locked, they thought, he must be relieving himself in the cool chamber. I'm going to pause for a moment. This is not the first time we encounter something like this in the Bible. This idea that, like, oh, he must be using the restroom. There's a story a little bit later where Elijah's on top of Mount Carmel battling the prophets of Baal, and they're yelling and screaming right for the fire to come down, and Elijah starts mocking them, saying, your God's probably relieving himself. It's just in the Bible frequently. I think it's great. Okay. He's in the bathroom. So they waited until they were embarrassed. When he still did not open the doors of the roof chamber, they took the key and opened them. There was their Lord lying dead on the floor. Ehud escaped while they delayed and passed beyond the sculptured stones and escaped to Seirah. When he arrived, he sounded the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went down with him from the hill country, having him at their head. He said to them, follow after me, for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. So they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites. Right? Fords are these shallow places in the river where you can go across. And the Jordan, especially during flood season, is almost impassable. And so these are strategic places in the river. Fords of the Jordan against the Moabites, and allowed no one to cross over. 29. At that time they killed about 10,000 of the Moabites. That's a big number. All strong, able-bodied men. No one escaped. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest 80 years. Right? So you can hear that rhythm again. So there's deliverance, they're raised up, and then the land has rest. After him came Shamgar, son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad. He too delivered Israel. And that's all Shamgar gets. Just a few verses. An ox goad is a pointed stick that you use to get the cattle to do what you want them to do. Yep, it's a cattle prod. He goes, go, 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 go. And so that's his weapon of choice, cattle prod. Kind of crazy. Do you see how verse 4, chapter 1 picks up? Chapter 4, verse 1 picks up. Can someone read it for me real quick, nice and loud?
After Ehud died, the Israelites once again did evil in the eyes of the Lord.
Does this sound familiar? Right, this is going to happen again and again and again in the book of Judges. That there is a period of rest and deliverance, and then they return back to their evil ways, and then they cry out, this sort of oppression, and they cry out for mercy. God raises up a judge or a deliverer, and then there's a trial of deliverance, and then there is peace in the land. And then they forget that Yahweh is Yahweh, and they return in doing evil. And I don't know about you, but I just think that this happens in people's lives very frequently. Like this story is not just about the judges. I think this is also a moral tale that continues to play out in our personal lives. We forget who God is, and we return to our ways, and then we say, oh dear Lord, please save me from myself. God raises up a deliverer, And again, this will ultimately be the story of Christ on the cross, that it will be done. It will be finished, Jesus says on the cross. So he will achieve what God has been trying to do all along. Okay. Doing so okay so far? Good? So here are the people that they're going to encounter again and again. These are the people that cause all sorts of problems for the Israelites. The 5 lords of the Philistines. That is to say that they believed the Philistines had 5 different cities, and they were probably city-states. And I won't bore you with all the different types of government, but there's all sorts of different types of governments. And so these kings, effectively feudal lords, probably had autonomous city-states. And when they would go to war, they'd probably work cooperatively, similar to democratic Greece. Okay? Okay, have some head nods. Doing okay? Okay, the Sidonians, Hivites, Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, that's all really prehistory. There's not a whole lot written about them. We have stuff written about them in the Bible, in other ancient sources, but like, there's no Perizzite civilization today. They're all gone. There's no Hivites and Jebusites. They've intermarried, intermingled. They're still here, but they're, you know.
Okay, but now can you tell from those, what are the replacement countries?
Okay.
Where's Iraq? Where's Iran?
Yes.
Because they are still surrounded by all these guys, they just have different names.
They do have different names, and they might trace some of their ancestry back to some of these people. You know, like, for example, the Philistines are here, and just a small moment of segue for a moment on the Philistines. It is thought that the Philistines are called the people from the sea, and they just show up one day with advanced technology, and they start kicking butt. And it is almost, there's some archaeological evidence to suggest, are you ready for this? You're not going to believe me, but you can look it up. There's some archaeological evidence to suggest that they actually are Trojans, that they are the people of Troy, and they resettle down here. I know. Crazy. You can look it up. So they settle in this area because they have advanced technology, they know how to work iron, and no one else in this area knows how to work iron. So they do fine. They're fine. They're a thorn in the side of David later. Goliath, he's a Philistine. Samson will fight the Philistines. He doesn't fight the Amorites or the Moabites or the Hittites. Samson's chief enemy is the Philistines, which is funny because Samson's from up here. But he comes down here and picks fights with them. So, they're people groups. Okay? That's the best I can do. Doing good? All right, I keep moving on. So they worship these things, these gods, called Baals. And there are Asherah poles. And let's find where in the text these things are so that we can point to them. We already read it once. I'll read it again. Chapter 3, verse 7 says, the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, forgetting the Lord their God, and worshiping the Baals and the Asherahs. You are welcome to look at your study notes. And here is effectively what they are. Baal is this guy over here. And the Asherah poles are something like this. Ultimately, we do not know. But this is what it is thought to be. Baal is a god in the region. He's a deity. He's a fertility god. He is thought to be the god of storm and thunder and the god of rain. He's important because if you don't have rain, you don't have crops. If you don't have crops, you die. And so the Israelites hedged their bets, right? They would worship Yahweh, but remember the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Oops. Right? Because, well, I mean, God, come on, there's other people in this area, and they seem to worship another god, and that god is in charge of all the rain. And we need those crops. We need the animals. And if they don't produce offspring, then we die. So they end up worshiping Baal. Now, Baal or Baal, B-A-A-L, is also a title, which makes it confusing. And it means Lord. So, they're worshiping the Lord. The way that you and I might pray and say, Lord, or God, that's not God's name. It's a title. Does that make sense? So, but you just have to be very, not careful. We need to be particular about our use of language when we talk about who Baal is. Is Baal a pagan deity? The answer is yes. And is Baal a title? The answer is yes. And so when it says that they worshipped Baal or Baal, or like this says the Baals, so that means the pagan gods in the area. Okay? They also worship these Asherah poles. And again, it's like when you see the cross. We don't actually worship the iron rock cross up there. But there are people who, might venerate a crucifix in the way that it's a symbol and it points to something. Doing okay? So the Asherah pole, this is a modern interpretation. This is a real ancient one they dug out of the ground. Is thought to be a pole that would represent fertility of a goddess. And Asherah and Baal, this was either his consort, his concubine, his wife, or something. Also a fertility goddess. Fertility is important. Right? This is why when you see ancient, you can see she has rather large breasts, Look how tiny her little waist is, But the nourishment of a mother is important. If you cannot feed your young, right, then your offspring die. And so when you see fertility gods like that, there's a reason why their breasts, their sexual organs are enlarged. Okay? I'll leave it at that. But that's sort of that. So I said I might leave it there, but we might expand on that a little bit more. Just for fun. Just for fun. I mean, this was interesting. So, cultic worship, right, would be more involved than just going to church on Sunday, putting your money in the plate, singing a couple hymns, listening to a homily, and then going home. Right? Cultic worship of these fertility gods would involve all sorts of bodily practices to increase fertility. And so it was perhaps seen as evil in the sight of the Lord. Make sense? I'll let you paint between the lines. Talk about a church growth strategy, man. So that's who those things are. It's what they are, and that's what they are in the area. And they were ever present. And they were present in these people groups in this area. And the Israelites were supposed to kick them out, and they didn't. And so cultic worship of other gods continues, which of course pulls the Israelites away from worshiping Yahweh. You can see the trouble that this creates and the tension it does. Okay. Military technology informs and impacts our reading of the Bible in the way that we've talked about a little bit. Excuse me. So Stone Age is, prehistoric stuff. Bronze Age is working with the bronze, and the Iron Age is here. So Judges 4:3, we'll turn there and just read it very quickly. Now let's double check my notes. There. So Judges 4:3 says, Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and had oppressed the Israelites cruelly 20 years. At that time, Deborah, a prophetess, wife of Lapidoth, good luck, was judging Israel. So this is a mention of a female judge. Her name's Deborah. She is going to go out with Barak, who's the general, and they're supposed to go out and take care of this bad dude, but he has some pretty good superior technology. He has iron chariots. Again, they're probably not literally chariots of iron, but there's iron on the chariots. And chariots were pretty superior. They were like tanks. And they're also really only effective on flat ground. They're not really effective on hills. So they go out and they fight. Deborah's there. She says to this guy that the evil bad dude's going to be delivered into the hand of a woman. They're all slaughtered. I'll let you read the story on your own time. But the best part, we might read that part of the story now. This is in chapter 4, verse 17. Okay, all the army of Sisera fell by the sword. No one was left, because Barak had pursued the chariots and his army. Okay, verse 17. Now Sisera had fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between King Jabin of Hazor and the clan of Heber the Kenite. Okay, so they're trying to seek some sort of, sanctuary. His army's been destroyed. Some chick judge was there with a general who was, supposed to take the glory, but he can't seem to find the guy he's trying to kill. Jael, a woman, came out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, have no fear." So he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. Then he said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty. I've been in battle, I'm really thirsty, can you help me out?" So she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. And he said to her, "Stand at the entrance of the tent, and if anybody comes and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say, 'Nope, not seen him. He went that way,'" right? Verse 21, "But Jael, wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand and went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground. He was lying fast asleep from weariness, and he died. Then as Barak came in pursuit of Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said to him, 'Come, and I'll show you the man whom you are seeking.' So he went into her tent, and there was Sisera lying dead with the tent peg in his temple." Man, brutal. But think about it this way, too. I had professors who told me to understand this, that when the Israelites would move, it was the women's responsibility primarily to set up the tents. And so you think about tools that women might be very comfortable using. Frying pans, rolling pins, knives, tent pegs. They can handle some business. And so she takes care of business. And that's the story of Deborah. There's a whole song about Deborah. That's Judges chapter 5. So that whole section is poetry. It's important to recognize that there's different genres within the book itself. And then we switch back into narrative, right? The end of chapter 5 is, "And the land had rest 40 years. And then the beginning of chapter 6, "The Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian 7 years. The hand of Midian prevailed over Israel." Right? This rhythm picks up again and again and again. Doing okay? Okay. What I wanted to capture, one more thing, was this idea of place names. I think this is my last slide. We're doing good. All right? I think that's right. If I go again, is it going to... Okay, good. Okay, so Judges 15:19. Let's turn there real quick. I have to admit to you that one of my favorite stories in all the Bible is the story of Samson. Why do I love this story? I have no idea, right? I think it is like the most Rambo story ever. It begins, as all good stories do in the Bible, with a woman who is barren and cannot have a child. And then the angel of the Lord comes and says, "Don't worry, I'm going to take care of it." If this sounds familiar, it's because it happens pretty frequently in the Bible, right? Abraham and Sarah are barren. Here, Samson's parents can't have kids. There's always Elizabeth, right? And is it Zechariah? Is that right? Who is John the Baptist's parents? They're old and advanced and can't have kids, and they want kids. Eventually, she gets pregnant, and she has this boy. And he's supposed to be a Nazirite, so he takes a Nazaritic vow, which means mom's not supposed to drink any wine. He's not supposed to shave his head. So this dude has dreadlocks, right? He's a gnarly dude. He's huge. He loves women, and he loves to fight. Like, what's not to like about this story? And then he does all these things. Like, he kills all these Philistines. He kills a lion with his bare hands, just like Hercules. Like there are other parallels of this text in different stories. So he's a man of great strength. And he's always kicking the Lord's enemy's butt. Like he's a strong dude. So he kills the lion. There's deception in the family. He marries this woman because he thinks she's cute. And then the dad betrays her, gives him to his best man at the wedding. He's all mad at that. So he goes and kills 30 people. He gives a riddle. There's a riddle at the wedding. It's great. Right? Judges 13 through 16. Read it all up. It ultimately ends, as you know, because you're good Bible scholars, with him falling in love. It says that Samson fell in love. It's a love story. Kinda. He falls in love with Delilah. And whenever I see the Delilah, I was thinking of the Delilah. Okay, so he falls in love with Delilah, and he he's head over heels for her. And is she a Philistine? Is she not? The text doesn't say. And so he's like, hey, I love you, baby. And then the Philistines are like, dude, that Samson Rambo character is kicking our butts. If we give you a ton of money, will you sell your hubby out? And she goes, done deal, right? 5,500 silver, you betcha, right? And so she goes, I'll have to get his secret of his strength. And he's like, oh, I mean, if you were to tie me up with like bowstring, I'd be as weak as a feather. So they try that. And then, of course, he breaks out the bowstring and he kills a bunch of people. And then he's like, ha, 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 right? And she does this 3 times, of course. You know what I mean? Well, if you were to put my hair into like the weave and the shuttle of a loom, then I would be like weak like a puppy dog, right? And he breaks out and he kills a bunch of people. And then she's all mad. She gets the puppy dog eyes and she goes, you lied to me. You don't love me, right? So the 4th time he says, finally, if you were to shave my head, I would lose my strength. So he's sleeping. She gets another dude. They shave his head, and the Spirit of the Lord departs from him. And he is a weak dude. He's captured. He's bound. And he gets sent to... Y'all, I'm going to date myself a little bit. But some of you are older than me, so I'm not really dating myself. But he goes to the Philistine city where he has to push a big mill. And all I can think about is Conan the Barbarian, just walking around on the Wheel of Pain. That's this. I mean, where'd they get the story? They got it from Samson. I mean, like, it's right there in the Bible. And so he's pushing and milling for forever, right? And then it says, and his hair began to grow back. The dude, right? He's getting his dreads back. He's getting pumped. And then but the sad part is they take his eyes. So he's lost his eyesight, right? It's all in the Bible. And he says, Lord, he gets paraded about this house party, and there's like 1,000 Philistines there. And he says, Lord, if you will just give me the strength for one more moment, I will crush these pillars, and I will bring down the Philistines, and I'll kill more in my death than my entire life. And he does so. The Lord blesses him one more time. And he murders everybody. Fade to black, directed by Martin Scorsese. Best thing ever, right? And that's what it is. That's the story. In that story, in 1519, are some weird things that happen. So in 1519, it says, so God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and water came from it. When he drank, his spirit returned, and he revived, and therefore it was named En-Hakkore, or the spring of the one who called, which is at Lehi to this day. Okay, so that last phrase, and it's at Lehi to this day, there's other sections in Judges and other sections in the Old Testament where they'll say things like, and it's still there today. It's still there. It's the same thing that happens when you're driving with the grandkids or whatever, and they go, why is that place, how'd that place get its name? Or why do we call it that? And you go, well, started by the Ford Motor Company in 1920, You go in Dearborn, Michigan, is always, you get the idea. Like, you have to kind of do the backstory. Well, these places are so stinking old that sometimes the backstory has been forgotten. And so they stick it into the Bible. They tell you why it's called what it is. And here's an example in our English language on why things are called what they are. This is a graphic from PBS, and I thought it'd be helpful to do it in English with England because we're American. You know what I mean? So, for example, Canterbury literally means Kent, which is the region, right? Or people, Bury, town. So Canterbury literally means Kent People Town. That's why it's called Canterbury. So when the kids say, why is it called Canterbury? You say, well, it's the area of Kent, and it's a town full of people. Does that make sense? Okay, this is called an etiology, or an origin of something, not an etymology, an etiology. An etiology is a story about why something got its name, right? So Buckingham, Bucca or Bucca, belonging to the home. So Buckingham Palace, it belonged to that person at that point in time. That's why it's called Buckingham. Like, you end up sounding like a crazy person when you're trying to, describe why something got its name and how. I think this is the best example. Why is it called Sussex, Dad? Well, it's the South, and it's full of Saxons, so we call it Sussex. Oh, that makes a lot of sense, Dad. Thanks. That's the answer, right? So when you're in the Bible and they go, well, why is that place called En Hakkore? Because God opened up a place and water poured forth and they drank and it was restored. That's why we call it that. So why is that place called the Temple on the Mount? Because that's where God provided for Abraham. Why is that place called? You get the idea. They weave these stories in and out. Okay. See some wheels turning, some thoughts. I think that covers all my slides. Yep, I'm good. Go ahead. Ideas?
Okay, all these people, all these names,
We'll go back. Yep.
when was all this written down? And this said that this was all oral,
Yes.
for hundreds of years. I mean, had they, all these names, all these people, I can't imagine telling that story, I don't know how many times to tell it, with all these different names and people, and it wasn't written down for hundreds of years afterwards.
Yes. Yes. The general rule of thought is that Herodotus was written down in like 700 BC. And they usually tie it to the post-exilic period. So it's all oral. They're all living in the area. They're all here. They're having a good time. And then the stinking Persians and Babylonians, these people, they come in, right? They destroy the temple. And they exile them. They take them back to Babylon. And then they're sitting there saying, maybe we should write some of this down in case we don't make it back there. And so they pen a lot of these stories in that time period.
I just was reading about how they rose. I mean, they cut it in stone, some was on papyrus, some
Yep.
was on animal skins. Well, papyrus disappeared. I mean, that didn't last very long.
Yep.
Stone would, but I don't know if you could put all this information on stone.
Too heavy. Vellum would have been better. Yep. Vellum's animal skin.
So when did they start writing on skin? Where they could keep it for years.
Different portions of the Old Testament and New Testament, for that matter, were written on different mediums. And so the preservation of the text is fairly well documented. We've talked about this pretty frequently in here. That, you would think if we were playing the big game of telephone, if I say see spot run, by the time it gets to the end, someone's saying purple red car. That's not what I said. I said see spot run. How did you, corrupt the message that much? But for the most part, through discoveries like the Dead Sea Scrolls, we've determined that the text has been fairly well preserved. Mathematically almost impossible. But we have good evidence to suggest that's true. And that's primarily because a lot of the text has been preserved. And so it's been written on things that have survived because of the climate of the area. If I write on paper and I stick it out in the barn, in 3 years it's toast. You know what I mean? There was no air conditioning, but this place is so arid in certain areas that there's very little humidity. And it was stored in clay jars and stored in caves. And so it was effectively preserved from the elements. When they find it, it's still relatively uncorrupted, which is crazy. But when do they use different mediums? It depends on what's available. And we know about this. You all remember COVID? And you remember when you couldn't find certain things? Because it had to do with supply chains. And it had to do with what was available. Like, I would argue before COVID, we had a really hard time understanding this idea. But I think after COVID, we get it. Like, if you went to the store and they didn't have potatoes, right, you just used a different vegetable. Same with the Great Depression, right? If you went to, toilet paper, right, you just use something different. So if you're here and you're going to write this down, what are you going to use? You're going to use what you have available to you. Whether it's papyrus, which is reeds pressed together, right? It's paper, or vellum, which is thin animal skin, like writing on leather, or whether it's on clay tablets, right? You have clay and you'd scratch it in. They would write on that. Or they would take a piece of wood and they would take ink and they would write it on the wood. We have fragments of this, of Scripture in that way. But there is a transition, mostly around the exile. I think they say, I'll go back here. I think they're over here in Babylon, and they say, we may not make it back. It would be like if you are a Jew living in Poland in the 40s, Hitler comes through and you get dispersed to Arizona, right? And then your kids say, tell me about Poland. And you go, we should probably write it down. We may not make it back to Poland. I may not be able to show you. And so they write it down. Tracking?
It's just the details of them. I mean, you say, okay, Samson did this, and that's it. Okay, tell the story in a couple of lines. That's it. No, they go through all the stuff, all these people, and the man, the back, all the minutia.
Yeah.
It's like, and somebody had to keep track of all that. That is amazing to me. And I look at these crazy names that nobody knows about. It had to be passed down vocally.
Yes.
It's just bizarre to do that.
Yeah, the ancients had a different way of memorizing and understanding than we do. And it is thought that young boys who were attempting to become rabbis had vast majority of the Torah completely memorized. And some of you have good portions of the Scripture memorized, so we can still do it. But we rely pretty heavily on other mediums today. And so I don't think the ancients were dumb. I think that they used their brain very differently than we do. And they had a good ability to memorize things. Like, for example, just small examples. If I was to go ask my kids right now how many phone numbers they know, you know what I mean? And now before we start laughing at them, if I start pushing you, and I say, how many phone numbers do you know? We're like, when I was growing up and when you were growing up, you had to memorize phone numbers. That's just how it was. And think back even before phones. Like, people have memorized whole plays, and they've memorized sonnets, and they've memorized poems. We have the capability. We just rely so heavily on modern conveniences, I think, that maybe we've gotten lazy. Yeah. I don't know, just an idea.
Well, I remember in Roots, when they went to Africa, and he would try to find where he came from, and this old man started going through all this stuff, and he came up with his name.
Huh.
Remember that?
I've not seen that in a long time.
Well, anyway, he came up with Kuta Kinte, which is his name. He remembered that, and he told this full story of all these people, and he told it, one right after the other one, and Kuta Kinte, his name came up. He said, that was my answer. Yeah.
Yeah, and these I don't want to say pre-literate societies, that's not a fair statement, but these pre-written word societies, they functioned differently. They had a way for oral tale and knowledge and retention that we just don't have anymore in the West.
Well, I know that's part of the reason the New Testament is more believable. I mean, you can say, okay, this was written down by people that were there, that actually knew Jesus, lived at the same time, and were exposed to him personally. And with this, I mean, this goes back so far. I mean, nobody knew anybody back then. It's all a story. But Jesus people who wrote about him knew him. So it was done so that they could read it later.
Interesting. We could talk about this more, about the reliability of the text, or the can you trust it, or is it accurate? I would argue that, well, Judges is maybe bordering. Because as soon as you get into the king era, you know what I mean? Like with Saul and David, most people go, oh yeah, that stuff there's good archaeological evidence for this, and Solomon, and yeah, of course. But it's the stuff right before that where they go, I don't know, So we should talk about some of that and what other archaeological evidence there is for the dependability of Judges. That would be interesting. I'll take a note. Any other thoughts or questions? Doing good? Okay. I'm going to offer a prayer, and then we are good for the night. Y'all stay warm. It's chilly out there. That Arctic air. Brr. It's cold. All right. Holy God, I pray that you be with us this evening and bring us rest. Be with our friends and family as they are unable to be here. Be with those folks online as well. And keep us safe until we meet again. We pray this all in your Son's name. Amen. All right. Thanks, y'all. Good to see you.